The Game by Liam Norris. Toby was brought into the cell under anaesthetic, and he was alone when he woke up. A small pool of saliva had collected beneath his cheek, which proved extremely difficult to pry away from the warm polyurethane floor. His head felt heavy, and his vision had that sickening spin effect he had long associated with nights spent haunting the streets of Akihabara. He gave up trying to pick himself up, and simply rolled onto his back. He fumbled about his torso, attempting to locate his cigarettes. Of course, they would have emptied his pockets. Toby let out a sigh. It took more effort than it was worth. Before his body could protest, he sat up, hugged his knees, and began to look around. The cell was tastefully bland. In front of him, the door of the cell was perfectly flush in the wall, in a way that suggested it was mistakenly cut out, only to be painstakingly replaced. Thank God there is a door, Toby thought, no matter how redundant it pretended to be. Opposite his apparent sleeping area, there was a system of built-in utilities. Toby forced himself to his feet and approached this array of touch-activated cabinetry. One contained a sleek, combination basin and toilet. Above it was a tiny perspex mirror, which housed a toothbrush, toothpaste, safety razor, and a small plastic pot containing a clear, soapy gel. The large panel to the right slid open with a touch of his palm to reveal a slim cavity in the wall, just large enough for Toby to step inside. When he did, overhead lights brightened the tiny space, and a cluster of LEDs blinked on the wall, revealing the universal symbol for shower. Beside this was a dimly lit symbol that seemed to resemble a gust of wind, a blow-dry perhaps. Oddly, it was now that Toby began to feel unsettled. He stepped back out into the cell. The shower door slid crisply shut without command. Finally, he approached the rear of the room. A small table and stool were positioned against the wall. Toby sat down. Instead of the high-pitched scraping noise he anticipated, the stool was muted as he slid it out and then back in across the plastic floor. As he was running his hands over the table's surface, an inlaid computer tablet woke up. The words, "Welcome Plaintiff 0813753 emerged from the blackness of the screen, the same way that triangular blue tile does in one of those antique Magic 8 balls. "Please select your living area preferences," said the next tile. It lingered awkwardly before sinking back down. 3 new tiles appeared. The first asked when Toby would like his meals delivered. The second asked how warm he would like the shower to be. The third tile simply said, "The Game." Below the tile was a sliding button that could be turned on or off. Toby hesitated. He looked for something else to press, an information symbol or something. Just "The Game," on or off. The other 2 tiles, now completed, sunk back down into the black, and the Game tile was resized to fit the whole screen. Toby pushed the slider to the on position, dragging his fingertips slowly across the table surface. The tile disappeared. Toby waited for something new to emerge from the depths, but the table seemed to have reverted back into just that, a table. Toby tapped in various different spots, trying to initiate something. Next he pressed his ear to the cool plastic to listen for some kind of activity. The table was absolutely silent. Behind him, however, a sharp clicking noise startled him, making him wobble on the stool awkwardly. Toby swung around. In the center of the room, a cylindrical beam of light had descended from a fist-sized cavity in the ceiling. The beam had a warm pinkish hue, and it was strong, only losing some of its opacity as it neared the floor. Toby was standing before he realized. He circled around the beam, feeling his eyes cross periodically when he ventured closer to it. Eventually he stood back, perplexed, his hands resting on his hips. "Is this the game?" he said aloud, fairly confident no one was listening. He studied the pink light for a further few minutes, feigning a sensible degree of caution just in case he was actually being observed. Gleaning no evidence as to why he shouldn't, Toby shrugged and abruptly stuck his hand into the beam. The exultation was overwhelming. He felt as though every single nerve ending in his body was in a state of sustained climax. The pink light coursed through his torso and limbs in an ample throb. Toby shuddered involuntarily, tears streaming from his eyes. Not only was this light a physical delight, but it permeated his mind too, bathing his thoughts and feelings in a warm haze, akin to an opioid high. When the light eventually disappeared, it felt unceremonious and cruel, as if Toby had only been teased with its gift. He had soiled himself, however, and suspected that he may have been in trance for hours, if not days. He tossed his filthy tracksuit into a pull-out waste receptacle. As the little door slid shut, a second opened beside it as if in response. A freshly laundered bundle of clothing and a vacuum plastic seal tumbled out. He showered in a daze, letting the water shut off automatically after about 5 minutes. He twirled lazily as the blow-dryer did its work. He rolled out his little mattress and lay down at floor level, staring intently at the little circular hatch in the ceiling that concealed the game. When he awoke, the game had already begun. Toby rolled clumsily onto his hands and knees to approach the beam. 2 trays of food were strewn on the floor beside the fresh bundle of clothes that he'd neglected to unpack and put on. He ignored this new clutter in his otherwise spotless cell and crawled onwards to the game. Something was very wrong this time. As soon as his hand entered the beam, Toby felt the flesh begin to melt off. He could feel the flesh melting off his entire body. Industrial hammers crushed his bones and insects devoured his organs, laying the young within him to repeat their hungry generational work. He couldn't move, he couldn't even scream. The agony was matched with feelings of despair and grief, and just as yesterday's experience had felt mockingly short, today stretched on for an age. I'm in hell, Toby thought pathetically, when he could finally comprehend what was occurring. Afterward he sat huddled in the corner of the cell. He faced the wall, not wanting to even look at where it had happened. Several more food trays had piled up on the floor. Some of the runnier contents were leaking out and forming unsavoury pools. Toby understood what the game was now. He wouldn't play again. He couldn't. But he did. There was no way to predict which setting the beam was on, heaven or hell, as he had begun referring to them. The odds were something like a coin toss. This meant you couldn't guarantee that hell would be followed by heaven, and Toby lived in constant fear that eventually he might encounter an endless streak of agony and that he'd never escape. He kept playing anyway. A few times Toby managed to tear himself away from the hell beam, scrambling manically to the corner to sob. Giving up early seemed to have consequences, however. Aborting a hell state guaranteed another would follow. Toby had to endure the torture if he was going to experience the bliss again. He refused to acknowledge that he could just cease playing altogether. The highs were too good, and he knew that he'd be touched by that heavenly beam next time he played. Weeks seemed to pass. He lost an unfathomable amount of weight. Food no longer interested him, nor did being clean. Occasionally he'd wake in fresh clothing, smelling of soap and clean shaven. His pile of uneaten meal trays were eventually vanished by someone unseen. Anesthetic gas must be administered from somewhere as he slept, Toby supposed. Dainty needle tracks began to line his arms. Blood samples and intravenous nutrition, he supposed. Toby only cared about the game. After what he figured was about 4 months, Toby woke one day to a gentle chirping sound coming from the table console. The beam had not appeared yet. The little circular hatch was firmly closed. Annoyed, Toby burst to his feet a little too quickly, and he needed to steady himself against the wall to wait out the dizziness his overexertion had induced. Taking a deep breath, he staggered with his gangly figure over the stool and lowered himself carefully onto it. He winced at the stiff pain he felt in just about every joint. He placed his hands on either side of the table and squinted at the tile that floated to the black surface of the tablet. Important correspondence from Shinjuku City Court, it said, with a little open button below it. Toby tapped the screen pointedly, hoping this wouldn't take much longer. A plain text box appeared with small courthouse letterhead centered at the top of the screen. Dear Plaintiff 081-3753. I write to inform you that due to a severe backlog of priority hearings, a suitable date has not been made available for the court to hear your case. Number 119237864. In accordance with Oceania's Criminal Justice Statute 477B, which states that no plaintiff shall be held for a period of more than 36 months without trial. The Honourable Judges of the Shinjuku City Court have agreed to grant us automatic stay of charge until such a time as your case can be heard. You are permitted to leave the premises. The court will inform you when your hearing has been scheduled. Yours sincerely, Shinichi Tomura, Administrative Assistant, Shinjuku City Court. Toby stared at the text box blankly. 36 months? He thought numbly. A pleasant swishing sound announced that the cell door was releasing behind him. Toby continued staring at the console, which had already gone dark. A table once more. Toby slowly turned and looked at the open doorway. Beyond was a similarly bland corridor. More neat little cell doors lined the wall, each with letter and number codes to distinguish between them. Toby remained seated. He hesitantly turned back towards the console and began tapping his hands and fingers all over it, just as he had done when he'd first arrived. The screen stayed black. Toby turned back toward the door again. He tightened his hands into balls and rubbed them on his knees anxiously. Then he peered up at the little circular hatch.